Well, I may as well go on and get started then. So I had the wonderful job of trying to summarize some of this that we've had over the past day and a half. And then I probably did more summaries than Mark might have intended, but with the intention of us being able to identify some of those areas that we need to work on and questions that would need to be raised so that we can develop more research plans, right? That's the whole goal here. So what I noticed, sort of altogether, even going across, not even from just one talk to the other, but going across the talks, that there's three big trends. The first one was, people showing, I was one of them, what the water quality or soil test data are saying. What are the trends, what are we finding in the environment over time that are giving us some of these issues or any nuances about that. So I figured I could summarize some of those. The other thing was a lot about practices. What practices are giving us issues, which ones seem to be very useful, which ones are promising, and what we know about all of those. And then the last bunch was about really communicating to farmers, reaching farmers' incentives, and the programs that are in place or are going to be in place into the future to be able to get these practices on the ground. Does that seem about right to you all? I covered pretty much most of the aspects of most folks' talks. So what I thought I would do is start with the water quality soil test data and kind of go over the main points that I picked up on, and we can add to this if you have any. So, I'm not giving a formal presentation here. I can go back and forth. And so I have a whole bunch of bullet points here. I want to say that the first thing is that dissolved phosphorus is what's on everyone's mind. That's the thing that's changed. But I think the other thing we brought up was that there's still plenty of particulate phosphorus that's running off, that we don't want to ignore that fact. Although that's probably gone down, and it's not the thing that's increased, that's happening. That when we look at dissolved phosphorus between the edge of field all the way up to the watershed, we have some chronic level of loss for every storm. But then there's always these acute losses or spikes that happen during practices that are not probably the best planned in terms of putting them out, putting fertilizer on before precipitation. Let's see here. Tiles are delivering the highest loads, but lower concentrations. So they're not filtering like we think, but they're still filtering a little. I think the other big thing was about looking at soil test levels across farms. A lot of Kevin's work had showed that, and our work as well, has shown that a lot of these farms are recommended soil test levels, right? We have some phosphorus stratification, and then when you do budgets across the farms, like Kevin has shown, some of them are in balance or even at a negative phosphorus budget, meaning that as we harvest crops, we're taking away more than what we're actually putting in. And then what I believe that Steve just showed us is that, if we don't apply fertilizer, sometimes even when we do apply fertilizer, we can see soil test phosphorus reductions in a shorter time frame than maybe some of us would have anticipated. But it doesn't seem to have as clear of an influence on yield as we might think. So it seems like when we get to those very low levels on some soils, we do see an influence, but it's not like every time you add a phosphorus fertilizer, you get this big bump up in yields, but that's kind of the point. That's how we manage our fertilizer. Okay. Anything else I should add to this before I move on? Ram.
I presented yesterday the available P actually is less than 9% of the total P in the soil. Actually, what's happening to the total P? Is it contributing back as available P, or it just stays there as unavailable P? So what happens to the total P, the 90% of phosphorus in the soil?
All right. So what Rem was saying is that, if you didn't hear him, that when we do these crop available phosphorus measurements, it's very small percent of, if you take all the total phosphorus that's in the soil, it's only maybe about 9%. So what is happening with that total phosphorus? And I think the implication is that maybe it's part of this legacy issue why we start to see these chronic losses. So I'm going to set this down, and hopefully it won't make a noise, so I can type this in real quick. There we go. Okay. Okay. Was there anything else to add to that? I only saw the one here. Yeah.
We see the soil testing, the bioavailable P going down, but we didn't have data showing that the total heat wasn't going up. So we don't really know that we're not building soil total phosphorus. We just know that we're losing bioavailable phosphorus, which to me
Right.
speaks to something else is changing within the soil over that time period. That is, maybe there's another mineral in the soil. The way that it's being managed, the pH changing with time, the calcium or something.
Did everybody hear that? Did you guys in the back hear what he said? Okay.
Composition of rainfall, acidity is definitely.
Yeah, so that's important to note. So I guess we're eagerly anticipating your PhD's work, students' work on phosphorus fractionation in these soils to see if we can get a little insight into that. Anything else?
There would be a tremendous amount of difference in soils too, depending on the microbial activity in it. That would certainly affect, you know, a soil that has a low activity is going to respond to your phosphorus a whole lot different than one that's very, very active and healthy. That would be something that would be a definite one end of the scale to the other end of the scale.
Yeah, so I would put that into the next stage rather than talking, because this is more of what we've seen over the past day and a half, that would be into we need some more studies on that because we really didn't see a whole lot about how biology is influencing, you know, phosphorus availability or any of that, right? Yeah, so hold on to that and so I can write it later. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. It seemed like the next is when we got to practices. You know, what are the practices where we seem to be causing some of the issues that we have? What practices seem to be fairly useful? And which ones have promise, meaning that we think that they should be useful, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of study, as you would think, based off of our incentive programs at least. So I would say the worrisome practices that popped out in my mind was surface application of phosphorus, especially if there was on the wrong timing. Of course, that's kind of a moot point now. We know with the regulations, but we should put it on there anyway. The other worrisome practices, of course, would be an over-application, especially if we're already applying manure and then applying fertilizer on top of that, and it seems like there can be lots of losses. I think Kevin's example of that was especially with nitrogen, of course, but any over-application, I think, would be a worrisome practice. We didn't really talk a whole lot about any other worrisome practices, except for maybe incorporation or non-incorporation. But the practices that seem to be useful are, you know, keeping soil test phosphorus at least at maintenance levels. You know, and Kevin's got a study showing that we don't see as many exports. Of course, we would argue that we need to know what's on the surface. You know, that 0 to 2 inch soil test phosphorus, that's really high. You know, just knowing that can help determine what practices we do. Although it's not, it's kind of somewhere in between. Is that a practice or not a practice? I think it is. Injecting or banning fertilizer or incorporation of fertilizer as well. So I separated those out, Jim. Because
I like the word incorporation.
yeah, so incorporation implies tilling, but with both Kevin and Libby, they had studies showing that if you did that, it had an effect at least on dissolved phosphorus losses. And then controlled drainage. I think Kevin talked a little bit about controlled drainage. Go ahead.
Back on the part of incorporation versus injection and that, you know, with some of the varying messages that have come out of the watershed that, you know, no-till was the culprit, that plowing will fix it. I just don't see any way that we're going to till our way to better water quality.
I agree with that.
There's no way we're going to till our way to better water quality.
Yeah, let's just take a show of hands how many people agree with that statement. Because I think that's important. Raise them high so they can count. Okay? That is huge. That is really a big. We need more research if we're going to use that recommendation. We really do.
Yeah, well, you know, there are prescriptions to where, because, you know, I'm
Potentially.
very, very high no-till. I'm not going to say 100% because there are times when we have to go out and address a situation where, you know, irrigating the soil on the field does show a huge yield increase. If you get into a situation where you don't have time to put it, I mean, if it's a weather event that's happening this year and you want to plant next year, you don't have time to put cover crop in and get that fixed necessarily in some situations. But Right, you say, do I think we should all go get plows and invert the soil? Nah, we'll be back here talking about something else.
Let me make one comment. Don Rogowski, a very respected scientist with ARS, says you lose 80% of your benefits the first time you till soil. Every time you till soil, you lose 80% of your benefits from that soil. So I'm just saying, I know most of our farmers aren't doing that, but another practice that I think is really worrisome is vertical tillage. Because you look at when vertical tillage came around, 1995 is when it started, and it just took off. It really follows that same graph on what's happened with dissolved reactive phosphorus, okay? So if it's stratified like you said, now we got a new compacted layer there, it's going off the soil, and it's running, and what are we seeing after 1 inch of rain? We're seeing standing water there, and if not, it's going through preferential flow getting to a tile, so it's going out of the tile. So again, I understand the incorporation, I understand why you want to say that, but if we really want to make change, we're going to have to look at ecological solutions to this. And that's where the no-till and the long-term cover crops really do provide ecological solutions.
So I think that's in the practices with most promise. So let's pop that up real quick. What? Yes.
I totally agree. That was best learning lesson that I knew it, but you put in the word for me when in incorporation injection. We see in the mobs when you put as a 3-inch injection, it's totally different when you do as a tillage after to incorporate, because you get rid of the residue. And also you expose the organic, particular pea on the runoff to be washed with the setting.
Right.
But the second thing is that I think my second comment here is that we need to give a credit to the organic matter in your soil. If you have a higher organic matter,
Yes.
it's a ratio of the 20-to-1 of creating the phosphorus, and I think it's about 10, sometimes, I don't remember the ratio, creating nitrogen. So if you have a higher organic, along the soil P, make sure you get a sample of the organic matter. That's why you go to Walmart and you buy organic soil, so you don't have to fertilize.
Yeah. So I'm going to put in a request right now to maybe Beth, maybe Mark or Anna, because we're mixing what we've talked about and what we think we should do. I can't type these in because those are further down slides. So if somebody wants to have these notes, you should be writing them down right now if we want to re-talk about them later. So that'd be great, Beth. Thanks. Jeff.
I wanted to ask a couple of questions of maybe Jim and Laura, and
Sure.
think back to what we heard from Kevin yesterday. And Dave, probably you may want to comment. First, I think everyone would agree that we need to move away from surface broadcast application. Mm-hmm. Okay. And everyone agrees on the importance of more organic matter in the soil and the importance of soil quality. And Laura, what I took home from yours yesterday was that there could potentially be a benefit in occasionally turning over the soil, but that was because of the stratification issue.
Right.
Right, okay. And Jim, you're concerned about turning it over because once you do that, you're going to lose quite a bit of the benefit. So, hold on just a second, Jim. What we heard from Kevin yesterday on the injection part of it was sort of what you were just, Kevin specifically said that we should inject somewhere down 3 to 5 inches. So if we did that, would we be getting all of the benefits? We wouldn't be turning it over, but we also would be avoiding that stratification at the surface, and we'd be getting it down deep enough to where the seed and the roots would really need it. Might be the best of all.
Well, that would be great if you didn't have any stratification to begin with. The issue is if you already have a lot of stratification and then you don't inject, or you do inject, even if you were, eventually you would come to some sort of in between, but there could be some period of time where you would still have high concentrations on the surface. You still have preferential flow, so you could still have high DRP losses. Kevin, I think, is first.
I hate the generalization of stratification. If you're going to recommend tillage, you need to have a scientific basis of what level of stratification.
Yep. Our suggestion is if you're, 20 ppm higher in the top 2 inches?
That's not the scientific basis. Is that difference enough to, that other practices wouldn't?
Fix it? So I guess you would have to go back to some older data and see how long does it take to draw down 20 ppm off of the top 2 inches?
Not only that, what I'm saying is, okay, if you have cover crops or you have other practices that may offset some of that stratification. I mean, 20 ppm, if you're at 50 ppm, you're probably not going to make enough of a difference to moldboard plow.
I'm saying not 50 ppm total. I'm saying if you were 20 ppm higher in the top 2 inches relative to your 0 to 8.
And I want to see the data of that difference of DS, dissolved react phosphorus, movement off
I
site.
think,
It'd be nice to have that study.
didn't Kevin's slides yesterday from his edge of field show that until he hit that 150 parts per million, the DRP didn't really start jacking
Jack it
up?
up.
That's what Libby showed.
Well, Kevin's data is.
Well, that's
that
Kevin.
too. That's Kevin's data.
That's right, but how you treat raw data is really important to your interpretation of that data.
Actually, it's somewhere around 50 to 60 is when that hockey stick started to take off. At 150, it was getting pretty intense.
Because the other thing she did say was that, for every doubling of soil test, you have a doubling of DRP loss. So there was some conflicting things in there, I agree.
Well, doubling from where?
Even down at low levels.
Yeah.
If you double it from 20 to 40, you get an increase, you get a doubling of DRP coming off.
Yeah.
And when Mara mentioned 20, that was the minimum. If we take all of the fields with 20 or more increment, in other words, you're targeting a soil inversion, a one-time soil inversion to those soils with greater than 20 ppm, then the calculation is, say, are you going to increase erosion very much if in fact you're taking a 3-year period to do the incorporation before corn, before the vertical tillage? I don't think you're going to increase erosion very much from the difference between moldboard plowing and vertical tillage given the reality of our current tillage practices. You're not going to increase the erosion that much that year, and yet you can accomplish a 28% reduction in your risk of DRP runoff based on the distribution of soil test stratification that we've seen in the Sandusky watershed looking at 1,800 fields. And so I'm saying it's something we should investigate and look at. Maybe just to see, okay, there's research out there that shows one-time inversion will reduce the stratification down and by a lot, maybe even more than it could make the surface less than the average rather than the average. You don't necessarily mix them.
Yeah, so I would put this category as the practices we should be considering in discussion. Like there's everything before that is stuff that, there have been some data about, we saw actual numbers with. These are things that we haven't seen as many numbers with, especially regarding DRP.
And I guess that'd be my point, is that I don't know that that's been proven that that is the only solution. We've got a lot of, let's just call them flaws. If we have stratification and we document that, do we need any phosphorus fertilizer? Will that feed the crop to where we don't need, if we take a 0 to 8 and it shows we're at 20, well, Tri-State says we need fertilizer. Well, if we're already at 40 above, is that enough phosphorus to feed the crop to where we don't need to add? And then eventually the stratification will mediate its way out. And again, it's just, do we know the best solution to where we don't have to use steel to fix the problem? Because I think, you know, that consistency of message is, you know, farmers are just out there waiting to hear something that fits their management need, and they can run with it, and they're doing the best thing in the world. So if we can just say, we all need to start to move this way and find ways to make it economically feasible. Whatever that answer is, I don't think we know it quite yet. We're still in disagreement, but we need to study some of these things before we just say, do this, because farmers will do it, and if it's wrong, we got to backtrack.
One of the things is about injection comparing to the application, surface application, is a placement and efficiency. Just imagine you apply the phosphorus in the ridges are probably about 30 inches apart, so it doesn't go there. And also we saw from Kevin data that the phosphorus is a very much surface phenomena. So it takes a lot of application to get that phosphorus to root zone, which is below that 5, 10, whatever centimeter is. In that case, when you inject, you are putting the phosphorus right where it needs to go, next to the root zone. And that's one of the reasons that I showed the model, and also from the study that I have heard, increase the crop yield. And then there you don't have to worry about surface runoff either from this phosphorus. So injection is a very good and most efficient way to get where the roots needs it, rather than to be wasted on the surface and be washed out.
Yep. So the next practices I have up here, which you can clearly see, is cover crops, because I think that there's clearly a lot of promise behind cover crops. I put in saturated buffers. We didn't talk a whole lot about it, but I did chat with Rick Wilson from OEPA about how he's testing some saturated buffers around in Ohio, and I thought it would be interesting to see how those are. So that's when your tile drain goes across your filter strip laterally, and so it diffuses through over to the ditch instead of bypassing that filter strip. It would be interesting to see if that is actually very helpful or not, depending on how much, I guess it would be depending on how much phosphorus is probably in your filter strip. Yeah.
Yeah, controlled drainage under what practices appear to be most useful. I guess I prefer if we maybe use the term water management.
Okay.
Because controlled drainage kind of gets that drinking water management connotation, which I don't know, I think Berg's still out there about phosphorus. Good for nitrogen, but we talk about blind inlets, supervised blind inlets, organic matter, managing the water, keeping it on the landscape. Controlled drainage is part of that, but it's bigger than just controlled drainage, I guess.
Yeah.
I think Kevin hit that nail pretty hard. Water, what is your water management plan is a good terminology.
Okay. We call it fertigation. It's irrigation.
Actually, if you take just call it water management, because again, drainage water management appears that you're just plugging tile and then your solution is, you get the solution. It's keeping water on the landscape beyond just that one single practice. So again, that consistency of messages can be misconstrued. There you go, that works for me.
Yeah, but you know what we have, at least, I guess my impression from Kevin's work was what we have data for in terms of seeing actual changes in loads from one practice is specifically controlled drainage. But what's promising is if we start to consider practices like cover crops or increasing organic matter that could increase holding water capacity and those types of things. What we don't know is we don't have a number for how really on an edge of field scale, how much water that's going to actually hold, if it's going to have, how much influence that's going to have on what's coming off the fields. Steve?
Would it work if you said water management / runoff water management and tile drainage management or something like that? Because you're really talking about both. You're talking about managing surface water, but I do agree that controlled drainage is the term that farmers would understand. And
well, this is pretty much in a weed right here, though. Yeah, we can get
water management, I'm going to discuss later list.
Sure.
For the theory.
Yeah.
And then keep the practices as we think of them as actual field practices.
Yeah, that's fine.
Laura, I guess the other comment I would make, you've got a lot of focus there on placement, but I don't think we want to forget the other two R's, which is rate and timing. So, I mean, those are gonna
Yeah,
provide part of the pie.
yeah. Right. So, but they are in here with the injecting.
Well, you got
Well-
injecting, but you don't have your, and I guess we always
But
said
that's some kind of
tri-state
a
rate, but after this morning, I'm not sure what we're gonna say.
Yeah.
But, and your timing,
Well,
in
but
lieu
that's-
of rainfall and season of the year,
Yeah.
yeah.
What do we, but that's, I mean, we didn't even talk about any of that, but, over the, yeah.
Add 4 hours into the practice appears to be the most useful. And that covers it.
Yeah, I think that's something to save for things that we need to keep investigating for later, really. I mean, because we actually saw some evidence of, cover crops possibly being useful and possibly not, depending on how you deal with the
Or
ERP.
the use of fertilizer. I mean, like what Steve was saying, if you put 4 hours in there someplace, that covers that whole spectrum of time, placement, type, application.
Yeah, sure, I can put it right here. There's not really any space, but we'll just leave it as that. Yeah. Are we ready to move on to farmers? Okay. Did you want to say something real quick, John?
All cover crops are not the same. You might want to distinguish between those that don't overwinter and those that do go through the winter.
Yep, so, yeah, that's definitely an important consideration. Mhm.
You'll bottle that thing up, well, I mean, that's one of the things that the farmer has to research what it is he's trying to capture, whether it's the nitrogen, whether it's the phosphorus, and then there's more and more information coming available to the point where they'll start prescribing the cover crop mix you want for what it is you're trying to accomplish. Exactly. So it's too hard to try to, cover crops as a whole is, that's great. Then when we get to the point of education to farmers, that's when it's, what are you trying to do?
Yeah.
You want to buy a car or you want to buy a semi? What are you trying to move? And then you can refine it.
So the last bit that I think we did a good amount of talking about, and Robin's back just in time, is communicating to farmers. How are we reaching farmers? How do we convince them to use the best practices, and how open to change are they? This seemed like the big themes that I came across. How are we reaching farmers? There's a lot of things going on. I think that we can say that at least with the fertilizer training, the 4-hour certification, incentive programs, watershed groups, soil and water, like all of this stuff is going on as to how we're trying to reach farmers right now. And I think I picked up on most of these different things, but these seemed like the big ones as of now. How do we get farmers to use best practices for their farms? You can see my font got smaller here because I was making this also in part today, so I probably overemphasized all of this. But it seems like convincing farmers that a BMP will work and having this consistent messaging is going to be very useful. Having flexibility in what practices they want to choose. I would say more on-farm research, the more there is, the easier. I mean, if you could show a farmer and you can measure their own water quality, then it could help them decide on practices. That's a little bit difficult. We probably want NCT for that. And then the two big things that I also picked up from Robin was, we target incentives to those hesitant farmers that are a little bit hesitant about doing practices, but then we focus on the education side and the logic behind why we're doing the practice for those motivated farmers to convince them that this is a good idea. And then how open to change? Well, I thought that was pretty nice sounding. I mean, and I think it fits well with my observation that it seems that most farmers that I've met want, if they're not doing something, it's because there's not a lot of, there's an economic issue there, or they want to make sure if they're going to do the energy, it's the right thing, but they know about nutrient stewardship and are concerned about runoff. So I think also having that keynote that don't worry about that group, that's probably never going to change because you should be able to get by without them. Gail.
Laura, I would add perhaps to this list are two of the things that we've heard about in the last day, and that's the forthcoming P risk index and the nutrient tracking tool in terms of two tools that will be at our disposal as a way of reaching ag producers in some new and different ways.
Incidentally, actually, I talked to Libby's group yesterday, and we're trying to connect the NTT with the P index. So we're gonna try to compare. That's a.
Why not? Dave?
One topic that's been so that clearly is how we can assure farmers that in fact what they are doing on their farm will result in improvements in water quality. The link between what they're doing and the conditions in Lake Erie needs to be evident to the farmers, because we've seen that one of the incentives for farmers is to have a feeling that what they're doing will improve the environment. They want to improve the environment, and there's a lot of information that currently shows the linkages between farm and the environment and water quality in Lake Erie, and that needs to be part of the educational program that many farmers may have not yet heard or understood.
And if there is a watershed scale looking at the whole thing, as we were talking about, you might have returned to farms many times to get information, but how many times the modelers went to the non-point sources to get the modified information? So it could be a farmer does everything right, but somebody is putting a pipe in the stream and is putting this phosphorus going to the Lake Erie. So we have to be very much aware, not to be blaming the farmer for all the things happening in Lake Erie. So it just goes back to you, your comments. So we have to keep our eyes open in other sources, urban, non-point sources, that how they are contributing to the Lake Erie's problem at the same time.
Yeah. So that would be, well, I guess that would be under the convincing side of things, that, and part of it's convincing that the agricultural runoff is the problem at that point, and that if it is not the problem anymore, that we move on to something else, that there's that flexibility, which makes sense. Do we want to move on to just making better lists of what more research needs we have for these different topics? Or did we want to add more to the things that we talked about over the past 2 days on reaching farmers?
The only thing I would add is how do we get farmers to use the best practices? Economics. If you show them where they're wasting $80 an acre, and if that doesn't open their eyes, that they, we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars in their operation, then they're at 15% that ain't never going to change.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of add to that point. I think that's important because I think it's good to share results that link BMPs to water quality, and like the SWOT model showing that like if collectively we did this, we could actually solve this problem. I think that's compelling and useful, but the caveat I would put is that there are farmers that care about that, there are some that don't, and they all care about profit, and the concern levels are much higher for regulation and profit than they are for the lake.
Okay.
So I would just make sure that I still think that there's a collective efficacy sort of thing where there's this belief that, well, if I do it and then someone puts a pipe in the stream, or if I do it and my neighbors don't, then that's not fair, right? And it doesn't fix the problem. So I think you run into some bigger risks there, really focusing on that kind of collective piece. So it is, and that's part of why I wanted to show those beliefs, is to kind of emphasize that it's not just these things can fix water quality, that's nice and whatever, but it's that on your farm, regardless of what everyone else is doing, there are benefits to you, right, in terms of retaining nutrients and decreasing inputs. So let's not lose sight of that, because I think ultimately that's the first most critical piece.
On the part of economic also, I totally agree. There are some practices that needs to be done, which many of those, a good practice results in good economics too. So you take benefit of it. But there are some practices, let's say filter strip become one practice needs to be done in order to help the Lake Erie water quality. If you have a good numbers of economic, of how much going to cost you, then, or benefit you in some cases, then you will put that money comes to the farmers as incentive in the right place and right direction, rather than just for everything that's not going to be useful in that specific farm.
So to be the devil's advocate here, when we do look at the losses of DRP that we're talking about, and we say that they are a half a pound per acre, less than 1% what's being put in, are the economics really behind fixing DRP loss?
Not from the standpoint of what's leaving. Because you're right, you look at a half a pound farmer, you're gonna say, oh, I did pretty good. The point is, if you didn't have to make that $40, $50, $60 application up front, you know, that's where the savings is. Your yield, you know, because we can see this in what's going on, their yields are maintaining without having to throw more fertilizer. Something's happening that is becoming more available. Bad for the environment, it's good for us. There's, you know, double-edged swords. Farmer has to buy less fertilizer. The environment's getting more costly. So until we curtail our guys that are still saying, I gotta put X out there to maintain my yield, that's change. So their savings isn't this half a pound that's leaving. The savings is it's $40 an acre. You don't have to spend.
Steve. Oh, Bree had a point that we never got to. I'm sorry.
Oh, so-
Did you have a point? Did you want to?
Well, if you've got something to go with that, I can.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on something Bill said, because we saw that in our conservation effects, our SEEP study, and we identified that the farmers that were doing a balanced system, which were increasing soil organic matter, and this was on individual fields, increasing soil organic matter, raising the highest yields, using the lowest fertilizer rate, and losing the most P, because they had everything in balance. And then we could identify fields that were losing organic matter, applying the highest rates of fertilizer, getting the lowest yields, and losing the most phosphorus through the model, because they didn't have their soil drainage, their soil health, some of their other things right in their system. And so what Bill is talking about really gets to the soil health component of managing everything in a balance. And that's probably one area that we have the least amount of research on.
I agree.
Okay, you have guys that have come to this conclusion and can't tell you why. You know, I can't tell the neighbor how to do what it is that I've done, because I don't know which one of them, you know, it's just one of those things that kind of fell together.
So I'm going to ask the question, is it possible for the farmers to reduce their costs, but at the same time maintain their yield level?
That's what no-till did.
I think they're reducing their cost because they're producing more yield. Their cost per bushel is going down because their efficiency is going up.
But you have a unique time in history again, because there's some out there that say we're approaching repeating the 80s all over again. And if that truly even is 50% true, being able to show these guys how to save money will make the difference between them staying in business and losing their farm. So it becomes, they should be more receptive to being more efficient today.
So, yeah, I mean, this kind of goes a little bit with some of that. So, two things that I feel that we're not doing very well is we don't seem to approach the issues as a system right now. In many cases, we're still approaching it from a BMP standpoint. Oh, we don't have enough of this BMP, we just need more of this BMP. And whoever we get to talk to who has an ear, you just need this BMP. And it goes deeper than that. I think we need to spend a heck of a lot more time, even on the things we don't understand that much, like soil health. We do need to spend a little bit more time having a deeper conversation with that producer to talk about what their goals are, not just coming at it from a water quality standpoint. There's common ground between us having a water quality goal and them having an agronomic goal. And it all kind of settles down on the right BMP that's going to help them. The second thing is just how he mentioned there that the margins for their profitability are just shrinking year by year. So a lot of these guys are so resistant because of that perceived risk. Yeah. And I think that, you know, we spend a lot of time saying, here's this BMP, and I think if we just stop at, well, we know it's effective, so just do it. But we don't really help with the implementation of that BMP and really help to make sure that it's successful for them. And again, that goes back to really understanding what the challenges of implementing that particular BMP is on that farm. Mm-hmm. It's going to take a heck of a lot more work. We're not going to be able to claim large adoption numbers across, a huge watershed scale. But I think in the end, down the road, that's going to get a person to actually have a sustainable change and have that behavior change, as opposed to somebody who's just kind of jumping on, hey, look, I tried it, I had this cost share, but never really truly adopted it. And a lot of it probably came back to, I made a whole lot of mistakes as I was trying to adopt it. That could have been avoided.
So as a developer of NTT, I think the group is asking us to add economic factor to it. And I give you example what happened when we in Mississippi applied NTT. There were a number of BMPs that end up to be 30% reduction. But when the farmers looked at the cost from irrigation to everything else, they find out that injection of nutrients into the soil was the best because cost them the least. It was showing the lowest cost, but that it's kind of obtaining the objective that what you want to be 30% reduction in that delta. So I think that's a very important factors, because one of the farmers says, I cannot know what for future I'm going to be there to pay 30 years of irrigation cost, but I know tomorrow I can find equipment to put that injection in there. So the cost was minimum actually. Actually was benefit because he was not going to buy more fertilizer to lose it on the surface. He was just going to buy less and inject it right to the root zone. So I think that economic is a very important incentive. As I said before, if there's a cost associated with any of these BMPs, then you know who you go to and give it the right number. Says that's what I need to fix this problem from any sources that you know.
And at this point, Beth, was there anything else that we had in this particular section that we have not, that I did not write down yet? I feel like I moved on to this pretty quickly, but I just thought I'd double check with you on communication.
I would say that
challenges.
the modes of getting a consistent message and the modes of connecting the cognitive and the structural and the technology practices and the modes that we can continue as all of the entities here to get together to reach that would be the only 2 cents that I'm still hearing.
Yeah. So how do you get there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are the day-to-day actual?
And soil and water has always had the most contact and receivability from farmers in the past. I mean, that's one of the only, that and extension are one of the agencies that can walk on a farm and they'll shake your hand when you get out of it.
Wait, who was it you said?
Soil and water
Soil and
and
water.
extension. I mean, in the 80s when we did it for no-till, it was, those were the people that came to the farm.
Yeah, well, we can sit and talk all day because we have state issues that the state funding isn't being supported of the next layer above the on-ground. The federal are dumping things into one particular pot and all of the pots are not connected. And that's what I'm saying day to day, Is this really a competition or is this a need that we need to get to that it's not a competition, it's a matter of getting
It's a competition.
But everything's a competition, right?
What,
humans are involved.
while we're going out talking to these farmers, we also have to remember that this is their livelihood that we're dealing with. We are making recommendations. We are coming up with ideas that may or may not work as far as the research goes. We're making those recommendations, and we're dealing with their livelihood. So they got to make a profit. They got to make something to feed their families. We wouldn't like it if someone comes in tomorrow to our offices and says, hey, we're going to change everything you've done for the last 30 years. It takes time, and it takes a lot of effort. But we can't just go out to these guys and say, hey, you need to change this tomorrow. It's not going to work.
And that's where I think Bree's point about connecting farm to farm and communicating individually with people rather than as practices that have to be implemented across the scale would make that work better, because then you can have flexibility in the practices. It can be testing different things and see what works best for the individual farmer and their situation. I think that seems like that's where everything's going anyway. And I feel like that's where the NTT can play a key role in there as well.
Can I add a research need that I think is important there that isn't listed, or unless I missed it earlier, but actually evaluating and measuring what you are doing with farmers so we can share lessons about what works and what doesn't, because I've said many times, people, I'm tired. I've gone around for years now saying, like, farmers need to believe these practices work, and we need to figure out ways to, you know, promote these things that are going to be more effective. And some of those ideas are up here, and that's great. But when you're doing those, and I know some of you are, let's figure out some kind of consistent ways that we can measure and evaluate that so those lessons can be passed on. And there's not enough of that. There's not enough kind of field experiments that are actually saying, I did this thing that I think raised the kind of efficacy beliefs around this practice, and here's how much it worked, and you know, those sorts of things. We need much more of that.
You know, and I see some of that at some of like the water management style meetings where you actually have watershed coordinators or soil and waters there giving talks about, well, this is what I did in my watershed, and this was what works, and here's what didn't work. But what would be really nice is to have that instead of individually. It'd be nice to almost have that as a meta-analysis and be like, okay, well, here can we put this together so it's not. I mean, the individual stories are nice, but that there's a cohesive across a lot of different folks about what's working, what's not working. Yeah.
One of these things you got to consider is most of these farmers don't own their ground. They're in a 1 or 2 year contract, and they're after every dollar they can get.
Yeah.
Because they won't have it next year. So you got to talk to the landowners or something. I don't know how you're going to solve that problem.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion about that in terms of, you know, can we give recommendations in terms of what a lease would look like for these farmers, or at least some recommendations of key factors to consider, or key factors to definitely not consider. Kevin?
Yeah, just to add on a little bit, the confidence of the farmer and those people making the recommendations is critical. I mean, you're not going to get a person straight out of ag college to go out onto a farm and have that farmer's confidence that what he's being told is better.
Yeah.
And I think that awareness needs to be there. No matter how many people you have, they've got to be able to communicate and have the confidence of the producer.
Human nature, man.
Yeah.
I mean, if you hear it from your dad, generally you believe it. If you hear it from the neighbors, a little less. Farther you get removed away from your comfort zone.
Well, and even if you're the son talking to the dad, it doesn't mean it's going to sink in.
No, it doesn't mean it's, but it's more receptive. When you hear news from someone close, you believe it. When you start to hear news the farther away you get their home, you put less confidence in it.
Laura, if I could add a little bit to that leasing thing, I think Robin might be, or others might be able to help us with some tools. I know we have a lot of farms out there that probably have soil test levels where they don't need phosphorus, and yet they probably have a 1 year rental lease which says you have to put on a certain amount of phosphorus based on yield or something, or a standard amount. And how do we help farmers and landlords value that transaction so that we can look at the long-term management of that land rather than 365-day window? It goes to all the drainage water management. It goes to all the things that could be implemented on that farm that over long-term would raise the value of the land, but we're looking at a short-term window. So it's not an easy nut to crack.
Respond to your comments about how to get education government agents to be trusted by the farmer. We care, personally, I care about that a lot. So that means what you're saying, that make the producer part of the process. Don't go in the closed door and come back with this closed box and give some recommendation for them to not understand, just do it. And that's why I was saying yesterday when I was giving credit to the NTT, was crediting a lot of producers because they are the ones that have to have this for them. So you got to be part of the process. In other words, it's not going to work right. And you are the one that owns the piece of land, either you rent it or you own it. That is very important. And regarding to how somebody has 2 years lease on the farm, I think the owner of the land needs to be. So for example, I rent an apartment, correct? I can demolish everything in the apartment and make it a bad shape in 2 years, give it back to the landlord. If the landlord is not involved in the process, I could do that. So in this process, the landlord, the owner of the farm, needs to be in the process understood. Again, goes back to being part of the process.
So, did you want, we're still on communicating?
I'd be interested in how many of these research needs can be addressed, how many of the research needs can be addressed through on-farm research?
Yeah.
Because that directly involves the farmer. In a sense, every year on every farm is a research experiment, even with NTT. And so somehow learning to capitalizing on the research that's out there and being done by the farmers might be an important way to gain insights, and not a very expensive way either, for that matter.
So probably based from this list, can we prioritize later on?
I would think so, yeah. Do we want to add to other practices we haven't considered? Yes.
I think I already missed my window, but it's okay.
That's fine. Go right ahead.
I was going to address that issue about, listening to someone that just came from college, and I appreciate that. But the experience that we are having at MWCD is that we have a program, an incentive program for cover crops, and it's very successful. The beginning of the program was very successful in 16 counties. I'm not heading that program, so I don't know all the details of it. But what I know of is, the group that Dr. Wilson was talking about, the group that is already convinced of it, started adopting the program, and they were very successful, and they saw the benefits. And then the farmers, they were not in that group, they started copying it. And now we cannot even reach the amount of applications that we have. So basically, we have more farmers coming to us that we can't even help them, because we split the cost. So we pay half, and then they pay the other half. And it's a project with a partnership with ODNR. But so we can't even meet that. But we have farmers now coming that they are willing to cover the whole cost of the program. They just need help to, plan it and everything. Yeah. So at least I know that that's not the case for everybody, but I thought I would share that this is a successful case of 16 counties.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of an interesting point, because and correct me if I'm wrong, those of you who are out there dealing with these incentive programs, but it seems like there's oftentimes a lot of money to have the incentive put on the ground, but there's not as much support for the technical side of that. And if you get to the point where you use up, or there's not enough money for that, and then people just need technical advice, that's going to be a challenge, especially with hiring freezes and those sorts of things. So we talked a lot about all of these other things. I just wanted to make sure I wrote down some of the stuff that we were saying in terms of practices that needed to be investigated more. Of course, we mentioned the overall water management, not just nutrient management, a bunch about the cover crops and water holding capacity. I added a couple others just that were off the top of my brain in terms of if we stack multiple BMPs, how influential are they going to be? There's been a lot of discussion about if we can even really target that bad actors, the top percentages of where we think all the nutrients are coming from, or if we're talking about changes across whole watersheds. We didn't discuss that as much here right now, but that's a thing that's come up a number of times in meetings that I've been to. But were there other things that I needed to include from what you wrote down? It seemed like we were talking mostly about water management as one of those practices and cover crops.
One of the things that came up this morning that Dr. Coleman was, when we were talking about tri-state fertility, was and it goes back to some of REMS, how does soil quality affect nutrient availability? The biological activity does release nutrients, and Jim can go into that more, but I don't think we have the measurements. I know on our farm, we're not applying tri-state levels for the yields taken off and the soil tests aren't going down as fast as what would be indicated, but hard physical research and data we don't have. And I think that would help reduce inputs and maybe get soil quality improvements too.
Okay. Yeah, so, and you know, I had that, I almost wrote that in one of the things that we knew about, and then I was like, but wait, we didn't have any, we haven't had a lot of studies on that. I know that there's a lot of interest in it. I did, for instance, Mike Weintraub from University of Toledo does a lot of soil biology work, and I was like, come on, we gotta get you out there and doing this stuff, especially in collaboration with Kevin King, and I think he's doing some of that now, which would be really useful. So I think that the problem that I've seen is that oftentimes we get some linkages here and there, but we don't get a link all the way to the nutrient, especially dissolved phosphorus. So, yeah.
One study I would like to see would be the application of gypsum onto the high soil test level.
Oh, I think Kevin's doing that too. Yeah.
Starting to do that.
I would like to see that on low soil test P or medium.
I would like to see it on stratified soil.
That's what I was thinking.
What's the difference between the mine gypsum versus the FGF gypsum that's efficient now? I think that should be something that's looked into as well.
I can tell you my experience with mine gypsum, because it's mined out of the soil, they do not have to give you any kind of heavy metal test or anything, because it's a naturally mined product.
Right.
So you end up with a little bit of mercury, some arsen, all those things that are within the world, because it's part of the world. Where the flue gas gypsum is actually 100% calcium sulfate. So it's a more pure form of gypsum without all of the way they collect the stuff. The heavy metals fall out in a different area and are shuffled off someplace out to a hazardous landfill.
The other things I included on this particular list when we're thinking about questions for water and soil, just so that you guys note that I did that already, was getting a better handle on manure versus commercial phosphorus and what's running out at the end of the watersheds and other sources. So making sure we have good estimates of that through time. Some stuff that's popped up in some other worlds in the soil is, you know, how appropriate are our current extractions for assessing phosphorus availability, especially when we're into these soil health type systems. How old is the legacy phosphorus that's even running off? So we see this chronic loss. Is that stuff that was applied that year or the year before or many years ago? Of course, the pH, sulfur, and glyphosate issues. And then I think that then we're caught up to everything that we've just talked about. So Steve, I think you're up next.
Yeah, I'd add a little bit to that legacy, maybe another bullet, but I almost hesitate to go there, but it comes up and a lot from researchers actually who work outside of the watershed, not here, but I continually have researchers tell me that a lot of our legacy P is coming from our stream banks. And I don't know that there's any data to support that, but I guess there would be need for data for the whole process of in-stream processing of P from the time it leaves the field until it's delivered to the lake. What transformations does it go through? How much of the legacy P is actually coming from ditch banks and stream banks versus the upland erosion from the fields? So yeah, P dynamics, that's a good term.
Cindy?
As we've talked about stratification, I think a research need or understanding would be to understand where the natural stratification ends and where our detrimental stratification begins so that we know how to make recommendations accordingly.
So, I mean, I guess the question would be is, you know, if we see stratification and we call it natural, but it's causing dissolved phosphorus runoff, that means we don't worry about it? Just to be a devil's advocate for that one.
So do we need to kind of have a recommendation to really define what stratification is? And when it becomes detrimental or when it becomes just natural and just let it go?
Or are there other ways of remediating the stratification?
Yeah.
I got to make a comment on this. I apologize for the cough. It started last night, so I don't know when I got it. But stratification to me is a really big issue on our degraded soils. And why is that? Because you don't have the organic matter in there. So just think about this. I'm a visualist. So if you have a degraded soil and you've got those cracks, when it rains, it's going to carry the water down through the tile. Or if we're doing the tillage, and maybe you get the phosphorus put down, but then what happens? You seal off the surface, then it's going to flow over the land, okay? So when we talk about this, trying to till it, you know what? There's a plow layer down there about 8 inches deep. We can find it all the time on our soils. Even though we haven't plowed for 50 years, we still know it's there. If you bury this phosphorus and basically put it on that stratified, on that surface, how do you know that it's not just going to still go down through that crack because of preferential flow? It's so much less of an issue. I'm not going to say it's not an issue, but where you have very good organic matter levels, we don't see the cracking in the soil. And phosphorus really is tied up organically. That's a major form of phosphorus in the soil. We can tie it up organically, keep live roots there. Live roots absorb soluble nitrogen, soluble phosphorus, and add carbon to the soil.
Yeah, we're still, but we're waiting on those studies to come out. Yeah, I'm gonna just throw that out there. I mean, all of the published studies on how cover crops influence dissolved phosphorus. Well, number one, there's only like 2 of them, and they're all from Canada, and they all have increased DRP loss. So
yeah,
it's like, well, what do you do with this?
So were they in a long-term no-till, and were they a long-term cover crop? Because you know what? 90% of the studies do not do that. If I do this for 3 years, and that's how long the funding happens, and I go from a conventional system to that, you don't have enough time. This is a long-term process, and unfortunately, most of our funding is always looking for short-term answers. We need long-term answers, and the long-term you get, if you start taking that out and you throw out them studies that don't do what I'm talking about, there's 2 main things. There's 2 main tools in our toolbox, okay? And I understand we always want to have all these tools in the toolbox, but think about a carpenter. He has 2 major tools he uses all the time, a hammer and a saw. That's no-till and a cover crop, okay? Those are your primary tools how are going to help this situation, okay? Electrician has a pliers and a screwdriver. Okay, yes, we've got a lot of tools, but there's some that will do it cheaper and do it, but you got to give them time to work. And that's the problem that we're seeing. Most of the time when we do these studies, we do them very short term, and we get totally different answers when we do them much longer term, and you fix those problems that happen from the tillage to begin with. Once you fix it, it takes about 3 to 5 years to make that transition. And that's the problem that we see is most of this research is way too short. If we let that research go for another 4 to 5 years.
It's just not fair. I mean, I can count on one hand the number of studies that look at dissolved phosphorus loss in cover crops, or a cash crop, or whatever, or what do they call it?
So did they meet my first 2 criteria though?
Well, I
did
don't
they
know,
meet
but
the? So if
but
they
even
did,
if we got rid of the ones that didn't, I'm just saying, then we're left with a couple of studies. So that's a research need.
and
It's a
that's
clear
exactly
research
right.
need.
That's a research need we need is on the long-term systems. And when you do those long-term systems, you're going to see that you get different answers than when you do it short-term. That's my point.
And those projects have started, so I think we're getting data now.
I think so, yeah.
With Kevin, what we're doing in Indiana, there are some that, which we wish they would have started 10 years ago, but they didn't. So.
Yeah, because the thing that we do, that there is some good, clear information from cover crops is you see a big reduction in nitrogen losses. I don't know if I said that the right way. It feels like a double negative. You don't lose as much nitrogen, to put it very clearly. And you don't lose as much particulate phosphorus, so we know it really helps with erosion losses, and those things are also good too. But the concerns regarding with dissolved phosphorus are legitimate unless we can show that the preferential flow and the water holding capacity really does increase like we hope it does. So, yeah.
Laura, on
Where are we now?
right here.
Okay. The microphone makes it hard to find anyone.
My past agronomist, Mark Scarpiti, was very adamant on this, and no-till is taken on the chin for stratification. His opinion, and I support that, was stratification is not necessarily a no-till problem; it's a nutrient placement problem. So and we've talked a lot about proper placement of nutrients, but and you guys' study on stratification is quoted a lot. So I think you guys are in the position to further that. One, where those stratification sites are. You know where the sites that you use. So on the sites that were highly stratified, if you could go back to those, and for ones that maybe reset the system following what you guys have recommended, where are they at now, and what did they, are they re-stratified? What course of action did they take after that? Because if they reset the system and go back to the same practices that caused the stratification before, then we missed the point. And I think, Dave, you gave a presentation at ADA, and you talked about some different systems, and I want to follow up with you on that. But we need to be clear that if we reset the system, this is the long-term plan, so it doesn't reoccur, and that's where we get into what Jim was just talking about. Unfortunately, I think a lot of our recommendations are still short-sighted, and that's why when I hear the producers come back or watch the blogs after they've come back from some of the nutrient management training, they're saying that no-till caused all this, and we all got to go back to tillage. Well, when I ran the numbers following the reset that you proposed, we saw a 10-fold increase in erosion. Last week I went to a meeting when they were talking about the elimination of in-lake disposal of sediment, and we can't deal with the sediment now. So, granted, erosion in the Western Lake Erie Basin is minimal per ton or per acre, but we can't deal with what we got now. So multiply that problem times 10. And we're really in deep trouble. So we've got to be very careful with what our recommendations are, and when we make them, we've got to make sure we're not recreating the problem that we've tried to fix.
It would be nice if we had historical data on stratification across the board from the onset of from the onset of the no-till, reduced-till programs in the mid-1980s, actually it's about the 1990s when we started that. And we simply don't have historical data on the amount of soil stratification. Stratification has been studied practically only where there has been research projects to investigate it. I don't think there's widespread testing of stratification anywhere that we've seen.
I think that was in the file cabinets that Steve talked about that got thrown out, because I know Edwards over Coshocton and Shipatello, had done some stratification studies.
Historically, the concerns about stratification and DRP were evident when Terry Logan was involved in the Army Corps' Lake Erie wastewater management study, because when they were deciding no-till, reduced-till, reducing particulate phosphorus was the way to go to meet the targets for Lake Erie, the concerns back then were raised about increased DRP. And that's really why our lab continued to monitor DRP for all these years, simply to see whether or not, that concern at that time would in fact be evident in the data. And so, lo and behold, we've seen these increases in DRP. They have corresponded temporally with the adoption of no-till, reduced-till. It is, given what was known back then about the importance of the zone of interaction, those were diagrams made in the 1970s about how you build up the concentration of DRP in surface runoff. It was from this zone of interaction, the top inch. So we do see, certainly within the data, historical studies, edge of field plots, the potential for the problem that in fact we now have. And so the question is not just a gradual move toward improved soil health and all the benefits that would come from that, but we're also faced with recognizing where we are right now and what we might do to most quickly reduce the loads of DRP going into the lake. And it's in that context that I think we might want to look at a one-time inversion to reset the system, if you like. And I think that resetting the system isn't going to change things very much from where we currently are. As you go from a aggressive chisel plow before corn to a moldboard plow, reset the system as far as stratification. Because chisel plowing itself will not reset the system. There's enough research to know that we still have stratification. That's the levels of stratification we're seeing out there now, or not from a no-till system, it's from the, or not from continuous no-till, it's from the mix of tillage practices and management we have. Rotational no-till, if you like.
Yes, there we go. I want to make sure you said that right, okay, Dave? Because it is, when you say no-till, we're talking long-term no-till. So it really, that's part of the problem. We got to have a consistent definition on these terms. Yeah. And people are saying no-till when they really mean rotational no-till. And we really need to understand that there's a difference between long-term no-till and rotational no-till. Because what did the researchers say? Rikowski, every time you do tillage, you set the system back 80%. Every time we do tillage. So if we do no-till for 2 years and then you till it, that's what he's saying. You're changing that system and you set it back. So again, when you're saying you see this correlation, yes, we did have conservation tillage, but you know what also increased and is really rampant out there? All you have to do is go up and down 75 and look at is vertical tillage is just taken off. And it really follows your curve almost. And again, what happens when you do that tillage? We get a new compaction layer, and it causes all those problems with the preferential flow. It explains what you're seeing on the soil. So again, it's carbon is what we need to get back in the soil. You're not going to get carbon in the soil if you're doing tillage. When you do that.
We've got
so
like 5 minutes. I think we've got, Kevin Elder wanted to have a point. Do you still want to have a point? And then we'll do one more, and then maybe we'll attempt a little bit of a wrap-up in terms of priorities of what we've been talking about.
Just a clarification on Dr. Logan's, and he did assume there would be increase in dissolved phosphorus, but his research and assumptions were that phosphorus was coming from all the residue bringing phosphorus to the surface. Yeah. So his levels of increase were, I don't think they even considered fertilization. They were looking at plant movement, so bringing it to the surface.
Yep. So, and residues do have a lot of phosphorus in them, yeah.
As far as what he's saying, that's fine and dandy. We all believe that, what we're doing to the soil to better it. But you got grain carts, you got guys that farm 10,000 acres, you got 1,000. When it comes to harvest, it don't matter what the ground is, so they got to retill it, or you're done. And that's a fact.
We're getting to systems now where we're doing controlled traffic, okay? So if we can do, again, it's an integrated approach, and within the next 20 years, we're not going to worry about those grain carts, because I'll tell you what's happening. Everything is changing so fast on the equipment. We've probably reached our maximum equipment size, and now it's going to start to shrink. And the reason is because everything's going to be farmed in the future with robots, and that will be much smaller equipment. All the research that's being done at Ohio State, they're looking at 2 to 4 row equipment, and you're going to have, that's how they're going to help with this combine. A lot of these systems now, I mean, you know how much change we've had in the last 20, 30 years. There's going to be tremendous change in the next 20 to 30. But I understand we got huge equipment there. But you know what? When you take a soil and you add a lot of organic matter in it to it, it actually will cushion the soil. And we've got a lot of pictures to prove that, I've got a whole bunch of pictures that will show that. Once you till the soil, you lose its structure, and then you get the ruts. But once I've got a picture that shows ruts where they did the tillage. 1 year of no-till, the ruts were half as deep. 2 years of no-till, you couldn't hardly even see them. And long-term no-till, they took the same truck across there. It's firmer, but it's softer. Okay? So that's one of the things. That's a misnomer that we've seen out there. You actually can hold that equipment up a lot better. It's firmer, but it's softer. And that's something that we're all talking about at the no-till conference, how our soils are getting better. And that's what I think everybody wants to have. So if we have better soils, the way you do that is with long-term no-till and with cover crop. It's just looking at how Mother Nature made that organic matter and made the good soils to begin with.
Dave.
Yeah, Laura. Most people probably don't know me. I'm Captain Dave Spangler. I'm with the Lake Erie Charter Boat Association. I work on the other end all the time, 100 days plus, year after year. The lake has been downhill since 2003. I am very encouraged on a lot of the things that I've heard over the last couple days here, a lot of good things going on. We're still a long, long way from where we need to be, a long way. All it's going to take is one big rain and we'll be right back where we were in 2015. That was a year that I wish never happened. It was one where we had 25% loss in our business, 25%. We stopped fishing for 8 weeks in the middle of summer, prime time. We've only got 7 months to work at it in the first place. So I want everyone to realize that it is a very, very serious issue. I really thank you for all the things that you're doing. I wish I could have taken everyone out in 2015 to see exactly what was going on. Ugly is not even close to describing what happened. So I do really appreciate it. I wanted to get that in so that there are people that realize you are doing things. One thing, well, two things. We won't accept, don't bother with that 15%. Our guys will not buy that. We need to go after those people too. It's the only way to get it all done. You've got to get everybody involved, one way or the other, even if it is the other. So that has to happen. The other thing is, I think I've only seen the word manure come up one time. We need to look at, you guys are the ones that are going to have to do this, but somewhere in there, that big discrepancy of the rates versus manure and fertilizer has got to change and get it back to its comparable across the board. However that can happen. That's one big, big change that's going to help everything along the lake. So I'll stop there. I won't get carried away. I've stayed quiet all week here, Laura.
You have stayed quiet all week. Yeah. And it's been one day, so it felt like a week. Okay, so I don't think we have a whole lot of time to really prioritize anything. Maybe I would suggest to the organizers you could put out a survey with these results if we really wanted to go through that. I think clearly from what we just talked about, some of the priorities need to be around the linkages between soil health management and dissolved phosphorus runoff, and that trade-off with other possible practices, including any type of tillage. On the water quality front, there's plenty to work on, and we'll keep chipping away at that as we can. So with that, I'll give it back over to Mark.
I just want to thank everybody for the last couple days here. It's been great, very informative. We want to make sure we want to have everybody's input on a continued basis. As you leave, if you haven't done so, make sure your email address is on the sign-in sheet. We want to keep everybody, as things change, more information comes out, we want to keep everybody in a loop. I know last time Laura had a conference like this, there were conversations that went on for months throughout the group. And we'd like to keep something like that going, whether it's sharing information, new information, success stories or whatever. It's just something that, a good link we can all have, and keep making the progression that we've made, and obviously it needs to happen
on a continuing basis, maybe faster than it has been, but we just appreciate everybody coming. Thanks again from me, and I think Rem has a few words here also.
So here's the plan. In the next few weeks or so, we're going to set up a Heidelberg CIG website. We're going to put that in the Heidelberg ncwqr.org website also. And we're going to post all the videos of the presentations, all the discussions, and send it to all those who have emails. So we're going to send that. And then these discussions, this list of BMPs, actually, or questions, we're going to summarize that. And we still have to discuss this in the group, but what I'm thinking at least is that we're going to send it to all of the participants and just ask, what's your priority in all these things? What's the number one thing, or number two, or number three BMP or question that needs to be answered? And then if you can send it back to us, that would be great, actually. And we're going to post also this list on the website. So again, thank you for coming. It's a great discussion. We have representatives from the state, from the feds, from the local groups, from the farmers, from the SWCDs, from the academe, from the researchers. And to me, it's really a great discussion for us. So thank you all for coming.
And also in the future, we're going to have each clip of each presenter available online at some point.
Yeah. As a PDF file.
Right, so you can go back and review it or share it with others. So I appreciate your attendance. Thank you very much.